They told him not to do it. His own advisors, the people inside the White House, the people who read the same polling data, the same economic projections, the same electoral maps, they looked at the numbers and they said, focus on the economy, not Iran. He didn't listen, and now we're here. The strikes began Saturday, February 28th. The trap that was set for weeks, the one nobody in mainstream media was willing to describe in full, has officially snapped shut. And in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what that means. The $300 billion calculation, the political math that has Republican strategists in a quiet panic, and the specific moment when every warning inside the White House became irrelevant. Stay with me, because what happened in the last 72 hours changes everything you think you know about this presidency. And if you're new here, subscribe to Daily Brief right now. Hit the notification bell because in the hours ahead, this story is going to move fast. Let's go back, not 72 hours. Let's go back further to February 21st, 4 days before the strikes. That's when Reuters published a story that should have stopped everything. According to Reuters, confirmed by multiple senior sources, Trump's own advisors were desperately urging him in private to focus on the economy, not Iran, not external critics, not the opposition, his own team, the people he chose, the people who wake up every morning and work to make his presidency succeed. Those people looked at what was coming and said, "This is a mistake we cannot afford." According to one Trump advisor quoted by Axios in that same window, the assessment was blunt. The boss, he said, was getting fed up. And the probability of kinetic action, 90% within the next few weeks, 90%. That's not an analyst guess from outside the room. That's someone inside. Someone who sees Trump poll his own advisors daily. Someone who watched the military buildup and understood what it was signaling. And yet the warnings continued, and the countdown continued, and the deadline approached. The Reuters report laid it out plainly. Trump had ordered a massive buildup of forces and preparations for a potential multi-week air campaign against Iran. But he had not once laid out in detail to the American public why he might be leading the United States into its most aggressive action against the Islamic Republic since the 1979 revolution. That phrase alone should have landed like a bomb. The most aggressive action since 1979. That's not a skirmish. That's not a targeted strike in the night. That's a war, a real one. And his advisors knew what a war costs. Let me show you exactly how the $300 billion calculation works. Because nobody in the mainstream media was adding the numbers together. Nobody was showing the complete trap. I'm going to do it now, piece by piece, so there's no ambiguity. Component 1, direct military costs. Israeli defense economists analyzing a comparable Iran operation estimated $2 to $4 billion for a multi-week campaign. But the American operation is larger. More assets, more sorties, more sustained. Pentagon sources told NPR the full force package was ready by mid-March. Maximum capability, maximum cost. Double the Israeli estimate, minimum $50 billion just to begin. Aircraft fuel, munitions, personnel costs, base operations, logistics. That is your starting number, not the total, the starting point. Component 2, the oil price spike. Brent crude closed the Friday before the strikes at around $89 per barrel, already elevated by what traders were calling a war premium. Then the strikes began, and according to Bloomberg reporting, crude surged over 8% in a single Monday session. Wood Mackenzie, the energy consultancy, warned that if tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz doesn't resume, crude would likely settle above $100 a barrel. The Strait of Hormuz, the waterway through which approximately 15 of the world's seaborne oil and gas passes, and Iran controls access to it. James Nitley, chief international economist at ING, told Bloomberg that a rally to those levels would push nationwide American gasoline prices to around $4.50 per gallon from $3 just days earlier. That alone adds 1.5 percentage points to headline inflation. at $130 per barrel. The level historical precedent from 1973 and 1979 suggests is possible. The calculation becomes staggering. The American economy consumes 20 million barrels of oil daily, $40 above baseline, times 20 million times 365 days. That's $292 billion annually from the oil price increase alone. Not military spending, not reconstruction, not stock market losses, just oil. $50 billion in direct military costs. Add $292 billion in annual oil premium, you're already past $340 billion, and we haven't touched the markets yet. Component 3, the stock market crash. According to financial analysts, the Dow can drop 3,000 points when large-scale Middle East strikes begin. The S&P 500 loses up to 7%. The Nasdaq worse. 7% of total U.S. stock market capitalization, approximately $50 trillion. This means $3.5 trillion of wealth destroyed. Not theoretical, not projected, destroyed from retirement accounts, from pension funds, from 401k plans, from the savings of the middle-class voters Trump needs in November's midterms. Component 4, inflation's return. Consumer prices were already running elevated before this started. ING's nightly projected that an oil spike to $130 adds 2 to 3 percentage points to the consumer price index. That means CPI reaching 6 to 7%, gas prices above $6 per gallon, heating costs doubling, food prices jumping 20%. Mohamed El-Rian, Alliance's chief economic advisor, warned this week that prolonged disruption to oil and gas production in the Middle East could lead to higher inflation and slower economic growth worldwide. And Bloomberg Economics warned in a Sunday note, and this is critical, that if Iran war has a significant and sustained impact on oil prices, and if inflation expectations become unanchored, then a shift in Fed policy becomes possible. The Fed raising rates into a war economy. Think about what that does to mortgages, to small business loans, to every household budget in America. Component 5, the recession trigger. J.P. Morgan economist Joseph Lupton put it directly in a note published after the bombing began. A pillar of our 2026 outlook was the observed fading of caution regarding U.S. policy. Early year data suggested businesses were moving past paralysis in hiring and investment and beginning to deploy their capital. Then the strikes happened, and Lupton wrote, "This NANT recovery is now at risk. A military war layered on top of the ongoing U.S. war on trade could reignite concerns over global stability." That's J.P. Morgan, not a political analyst, not an opposition strategist. J.P. Morgan economists at Natixis outlined 2 scenarios in a Sunday report. In one, U.S. growth slows to between 0.5% and 1.5% for the year, with inflation rising simultaneously. That's stagflation. The specific economic nightmare no Federal Reserve playbook can easily resolve. You can't cut rates when inflation is surging. You can't raise rates when growth is collapsing. The Fed gets trapped. And so does every American who believed Trump when he said inflation was over. This is the trap, the full trap. Not $300 billion, not $342 billion. The realistic total economic impact, and including market crash, recession, prolonged conflict, reconstruction, exceeds $1 trillion, and even the conservative $300 billion figure is, as one advisor inside the White House privately admitted to CNN, a political risk. No ands, ifs, or buts. Now subscribe to Daily Brief if you haven't yet. Hit the bell. This is exactly the analysis the mainstream coverage is skipping past, and we're just getting started. Let me show you what was happening inside the White House in the days before the strikes, because the internal dynamic is the part of this story that reveals the most. According to CNN and Axios reporting, Jared Kushner was among those hoping a nuclear deal with Iran was still reachable. He had spent hours in Geneva negotiating. He believed agreement was possible. He believed the economic costs of war exceeded any strategic benefit. He was urging more diplomacy, more patience, more time. On the other side stood Benjamin Netanyahu, who visited the White House and, according to CNN, argued that Iran had never been weaker, that the time was right to extract concessions or eliminate Iran's missile program entirely. Netanyahu brought with him, according to reporting, a list of 73 targets. Kushner's voice against Netanyahu's voice, American economic concerns against Israeli security concerns. Steve Witko, the special envoy who led the Geneva negotiations alongside Kushner, was also urging a deal. He believed progress had been made, but progress is not an agreement. Gaps remained wide. Iran had not submitted a written proposal meeting Trump's stated requirements. And without that proposal, the advisors' arguments became increasingly irrelevant. According to two Trump advisors quoted by CNN, the period before the strikes resembled previous decision points: the Iran strike decision the prior year, the Maduro operation in January. Trump vacillated. He pulled advisors constantly. He seemed convinced, then changed his mind, then seemed convinced again, and then suddenly the decision was final. Advisors learned it was irreversible when the military began moving, hours before the operation began. That's how it always goes. Weeks of back and forth, endless deliberation, and then one moment of finality that no internal warning can reverse. On February 21st, the same day Reuters broke their story, Trump said publicly, "Iran better negotiate a fair deal. If that doesn't happen, bad things will happen." Not diplomatic language, not ambiguity, bad things. And then days later, at a separate public appearance, you'll find out in probably 10 days. Maybe we'll make a deal. Maybe we take it a step further. 10 days. He set his own countdown, and when that countdown expired without a satisfactory Iranian proposal, authorization followed. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated on Wednesday that Trump decided to go to war based on his feeling described as based on fact that Iran was already preparing to attack the United States. The precise timing of the strikes was then determined by intelligence showing Supreme Leader Qam and other senior Iranian officials were gathered together. And with that intelligence, the decision that advisors had spent weeks trying to prevent was made in a matter of hours. Now, let me show you what the strikes actually did and why even the success scenario carries catastrophic consequences. According to multiple reports, President Trump claimed initial strikes killed as many as 48 members of Iran's leadership, including Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself. CENTCOM has since announced the destruction of the Iranian Navy. Iran is widening its retaliatory strikes throughout the region, and Khamenei's funeral services, according to NPR reporting from March 4th, are set to begin this evening. Stop. Let that land. The supreme leader of Iran, the man who has ruled that country since 1989, is dead. This is not a warning shot. This is not a limited operation. This is a decapitation of an entire government structure. And the White House has already quietly walked back its stated objective of regime change, replacing it with a lower bar that officials are now hoping can be achieved in a matter of weeks. Republican strategist Rob Godfrey described the situation to Reuters with brutal precision. The juxtaposition between a successful State of the Union address that focused on affordability and the economic issues that voters care about and going to war in the Middle East days later is not just whiplash-inducing, it's head-spinning. And while Trump promised in public that oil prices would drop once the conflict ends, he has offered no mechanism for how that would happen. As NPR's Deepa Shivaram reported on March 4th, 5 days into the conflict, key questions remain entirely unanswered. The timeline, the end goal. What comes after Khamenei? What fills the vacuum? An Applebaum writing in The Atlantic warned that the vacuum left by the strikes might be filled by breakaway groups within the Revolutionary Guard or other factions. She also noted that some of Trump's own prior actions, including defunding Voice of America's Persian language service, which had been a critical independent news source for Iranian citizens, had actively set up more obstacles to Iran's future stability. The country that was supposed to take over its own government, as Trump publicly called for, may have fewer tools to do so than at any point in decades. This matters because it defines the economic timeline. A war that ends in weeks produces a different economic outcome than a war that drags through the summer and into November. And according to the Fortune analysis of the conflict's cost, the price tag could rise dramatically the longer it lasts and the more factions and belligerent become involved. The U.S. military, according to the same reporting, could soon face munitions constraints for key weapon systems. Constraints that either force a pause interpreted globally as weakness or force an escalation into categories of engagement that carry their own political costs. Now let me walk you through the electoral math, because this is what has Republican strategists privately terrified. Not abstractly, mathematically, Republicans currently hold the House with a 9-seat majority, 222 to 213. Historical pattern. The party controlling the White House loses an average of 30 seats in the first midterm. A 30-seat loss from a 9-seat majority means Democrats win the House by 21 seats. Speaker Jeff Hockey Trump's legislative agenda paralyzed. Investigations begin, but that's the baseline. Without a war, without an oil shock, without a recession. With those factors, according to the White House's own internal modeling, which CNN reported includes scenarios of how a prolonged military engagement could erode public support in competitive congressional districts, the losses exceed 50 seats, a 60 to 80-seat Democratic House majority, effectively the end of Trump's second-term agenda with 2 years remaining. The Senate math is worse in some ways. Republicans are defending 21 seats in the 2026 cycle, Democrats only 13, an asymmetric battlefield already. Lose 3 seats and the Senate flips. Lose 5, and Democrats have a working majority. With gas at $6 per gallon in November, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, Maine, North Carolina all become genuine targets. Democratic Senate plus Democratic House plus a war presidency with no end date. 2 years of investigations. 2 years of blocked appointments, 2 years of legislative paralysis, 2 years of political destruction, all for a war whose strategic objectives are still being debated inside the building that launched it. According to CNN reporting, Trump's advisors had been working intensively before the strikes to convince him that the State of the Union address focused entirely on affordability, economic performance, domestic prosperity was the winning message. The playbook was clear. The midterm strategy was built around it, and 4 days later, that strategy was gone. Matthew Bartlett, a GOP strategist and former Trump State Department official, told CNN directly, "No one thinks this war is popular. At best, this is a distraction from the priority of the economy. No one. Not one person in the Republican establishment who looked at the polling, who saw the economic models, who understood the timing, thought this was the right move politically, and yet here we are." Before I show you the 2 paths forward, leave your answer in the comments. Did you see this coming? I read every single one. And if this analysis is making sense to you, hit like. It tells me to keep going deeper on stories like this. Now, the 2 paths. Path 1, the optimistic scenario. Iran's remaining leadership, chaotic, fragmented, without common, decides against prolonged resistance. The Revolutionary Guard splinters into competing factions that neutralize each other rather than project force outward. The Strait of Hormuz reopens fully within weeks. Oil recedes toward $85. The stock market stabilizes. Inflation pressure remains elevated but manageable. Trump declares victory. Republicans pivot back to economic messaging. The midterm damage is real but survivable. A 15 to 20 seat House loss. A narrow Senate hold. A bruised presidency, not a broken one. For that path, you need Iran's post-cabinet power structure to collapse faster than it consolidates. You need no major proxy escalation from Hezbollah, from Houthi remnants, from Iraqi militias. You need the Strait of Hormuz to remain functionally open. And you need all of that to happen before the summer, before the campaign season absorbs the full cost of elevated gas prices. Is that possible? Yes. Is it likely? Ask J.P. Morgan, ask Natixis, ask Wood Mackenzie, none of them are betting on it. Path 2, the spiral. Iran's fragments don't collapse, they disperse and metastasize. Revolutionary Guard units launch what SGH Macro Advisors CEO Sasan Garamani described as scorched earth tactics against civilian centers and global economic infrastructure. Attacks designed not to win militarily, but to pressure an end to the conflict by inflicting maximum global economic pain. Oil stays above $100 through the summer. Inflation accelerates. The Fed holds rates or worse is forced to raise them. Growth slows to the 0.5% to 1.5% range that Natix has projected. The American economy enters technical stagflation by Q3. Gas prices hit $5 and don't come back down before November. Every Republican running for re-election in a competitive district is asked one question at every single debate. Why did your party do this? That is Path 2. Nobody wins in Path 2. Nobody comes out ahead. Not Trump, not the Republican Party, not American voters, not the Iranian people, not the global economy. As economists at Natixis noted, the tail risks have certainly increased. The difference between Paths 1 and 2 is not strategy now. It's the behavior of a fragmented Iranian state that nobody inside the American government fully understands. The 2003 parallel is impossible to ignore, and Trump's advisors, many of whom served in the Bush administration, know it intimately. Iraq War began in March 2003. Bush's approval soared to 70%. Republicans seemed invincible, but the war lasted longer than promised. Costs exceeded projections. No weapons of mass destruction. Public support collapsed. By the 2006 midterms, Iraq was a millstone around every Republican neck. They lost 30 House seats, lost 6 Senate seats, lost both chambers, and the Iraq War did not trigger an oil crisis, did not crash the markets, did not create stagflation. Its political costs came purely from mission failure and duration. Iran will be worse because Iran carries all of Iraq's risks, plus the $300 billion economic trap. The math is multiplicative, not additive. Trump reportedly dismisses the Iraq comparison. He sees this as different. He sees himself as different. And that dismissal is the thing that terrified his advisors most. Because every president thinks their war will be different. Every president thinks they've calculated correctly. Every president who has ever looked at a military option and thought, this one will be quick, has eventually had to explain to the American public why it wasn't. History is undefeated on this point. Here is where we stand right now. It is March 5th, 2026. The strikes began 6 days ago. 6 American service members are confirmed dead, with officials bracing for more. The Iranian Navy has been destroyed. According to CENTCOM, Ali Khamenei is dead. Iran is widening retaliatory strikes across the region. The Strait of Hormuz remains disrupted. Oil is elevated. The stock market is in turmoil. The White House is struggling to explain what comes next, and Republican strategists are quietly, privately in conversations that will never be attributed, asking how they survive November. The trap that was set in February has closed. The $300 billion minimum cost, direct military plus oil premium, not counting recession, not counting market destruction, not counting reconstruction, is now a floor, not a ceiling. Every day this continues, that number grows. Every additional week of Hormuz's disruption, that number grows. Every proxy escalation, that number grows. Trump's advisors told him, Reuters reported it, CNN analyzed it, Bloomberg modeled it, JP Morgan warned it, the markets priced it, and then it happened anyway. Because instinct overrode calculation, because military buildup creates its own momentum. Because once 2 carrier strike groups are deployed, once 300 combat aircraft are positioned, once B-2 bombers are staged at Diego Garcia, once the authorization codes are generated and held, the pressure to use all of that hardware becomes almost gravitational. Backing down has a cost. It's just a different kind of cost. Trump chose the military cost over the political cost. His advisors wanted the opposite. Now, we all live with the consequences. What happens to the Republican Party in November, to those 22 competitive House seats, to those 7 vulnerable Senate seats, depends entirely on whether Path 1 or Path 2 unfolds over the next 8 months. And that depends on the behavior of a post-com Iran that even the most informed people in Washington admit they do not fully understand. What I know is this: the voters Trump won, the truck drivers, the retirees, the suburban families, the small business owners, they are already watching gas prices. They are already watching their 401k statements. They are already hearing economists use the word stagflation, and they will remember in November who made the decision that set this in motion. 3 questions I want you to answer in the comments. Is Trump making a historic mistake? Or is the short-term political cost worth the long-term strategic elimination of Iran's nuclear program? Do you believe the conflict ends in weeks, as the White House claims, or does it expand? And the one that matters most when the dust settles, which party emerges stronger and which country? Leave your answers. I will read every single one. This is Daily Brief. Subscribe if you haven't. The story isn't over. It's barely begun.